There was no real class for that I learned at UCLA was how to study. Because I thought I knew how to study. Being at Santa Barbara City College, I was on the dean's list. And the dean's list, you just have to have a certain GPA, and you can be on the dean's list. And so then I went to UCLA, and I was going through orientation, and they said, well, when you transfer, your GPA is going to drop by 1. So I thought, okay, my GPA is going to drop by 1, then I'm going to make sure it doesn't drop by 1, because I'm going to study extra hard when I go to UCLA. In fact, that's all I'm going to do, because when I was at Santa Barbara, I was interested in a lot of things, so I didn't really focus as much on studies. And so I go to UCLA, and then I devote every single minute to studying, because I want to maintain this. I want to be on the dean's list at UCLA. So I get there, and I take my first exam in chemistry. I'm a chemistry major, so I take my chemistry exam. It's physical chemistry, and I bombed it. I got I think it was like a D or an F on my first test at UCLA, and it was a shock to the system, because here now all of a sudden I went from doing pretty well, pretty confident, to just struggling just to survive. So then I thought, okay, I need to devote even more time to studying. And so, where can I find more? Well, less sleep. Less sleep, more time to study. So I just did less sleep, more study, and still was struggling. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? For that class, I turned it around. I was able to pull out of that nosedive, and I did okay on the final. And I ended up with like a C plus in a majors class. So I was thinking, should I change my major? And I got a C plus in this class, and I almost had a D. But it turned out it wasn't the number of hours or minutes or seconds that I was studying. It was how I was studying. That was the problem. When I went to UCLA, I wanted to learn everything. And so, for example, this engineering class had a 1,200-page textbook. 1,200-page textbook in 10 weeks. A 1,200-page novel is not hard. 1,200-page novel, easy. If you take a literature class at UCLA, you're going to get over 1,000 pages of reading. No doubt about it. But a 1,200-page science or engineering book, you look at the time. Like, I wouldn't pay attention to the time. I go through 5 pages. 5 pages. I look at the time. Wow, where did that 2 hours go? I spent 2 hours on 5 pages of reading. Now, this is a 1,000-page book. How am I going to finish this 1,000-page book in 10 weeks? It's impossible. And so I was studying wrong. The thing I tried to do is I tried to learn everything. If they gave me the book, I tried to study from the book, because there's a lot of information in the book, and I wanted to learn everything. But that turned out I was learning a lot of stuff, although important, wasn't relevant to my grade. And so instead what I did was I just focused on what was important. So if you have a 1,200-page book, what pages are important in that 1,200-page book? What pages do you really need to know? What pages do you really need to study in that book? I just read it myself and highlight things and annotate things, but a complete waste of time. And there's not enough time. It's impossible to do. And so what do? Well, how does anybody know what's important? The only way you can know what's important in that book is if somebody tells you. And who tells you? It's the professor that tells you. What's important is what they lecture on. And so this was the thing. I shifted from studying from the book to studying from the lecture. And I made it my goal this. My goal was to take as comprehensive as notes as possible. And it's not easy to do, to take comprehensive notes. During that Chem class, my first class, majors class at UCLA, there were only 12 students in the class. And so the professor, what he would do was he'd walk behind all the students and then read their notes. It's kind of weird. So professor's standing behind you, reading your notes over your shoulder. And then This is true story. He goes back up to the front of the class and says something to the effect that, he says all this stuff, but, on average, only 60% of it gets translated to the notes. And so that means 40% of that information is lost. Not only that, there are students that don't write notes. If you don't write notes, then, the statistics are the next day, 60% of the information is gone. And so what I did was I tried to get 100%, but I write too slowly to get 100% of the information. I just can't write fast enough. And that got me thinking, in high school, one of my teachers said that the best thing you can do for college is to take a class in shorthand. Because if you know how to write shorthand, then you can write everything that the professor says, and then you'll have a comprehensive, like 100% set of notes. But I never did that. And so what I did instead was this. Let's say I only got 60% of the information down, written. It was because I can't write fast enough, but I remember stuff. And so what I would do is right after class, I would sit down and then go through my notes and fill in as many blanks as I could. And as I fill in those blanks, I would get a more and more complete set of notes. And then what I do is if there are still blank sections there, I would go to the book. At least I know what to read. Rather than reading 1,200 pages, I just cut down the number of pages that I need to read way, way down. I would just focus on the sections where I had blanks or the sections where I had some confusion. That is, I didn't quite understand what they were talking about. I would go through and I'd read the book just for those sections. Sometimes reading the book would clarify it, sometimes it didn't. And so if I still struggled to understand it, and the class material was pretty hard, so after class I always thought, I really didn't get it. I really still didn't understand what the professor was talking about. And that was typical there. A lot of people think, well, in that case the professor's not doing their job, but in science, that's the way it is. If you go to a scientific conference and you sit down in a field that you're not that familiar with, it's very confusing, and so it's your job just to go home and then sort it out afterwards. But anyway, what I did was I would go back through and focus my reading just on the sections that were discussed in lecture. Sometimes the textbook helped, sometimes it didn't. If the textbook didn't help, then I would go to the bookstore and look for alternate textbooks. There are different sections there, and some of the other sections used an alternate book. Or I would look for the textbook for the class that was one level higher. Because sometimes in our textbook, a topic might take up a paragraph, but in an advanced book, that topic might take up a whole chapter or like 5 pages. And there, it's much more detailed, so it makes it a little easier to understand. So ultimately, my goal was to have a complete set of notes, and that complete set of notes contained everything that was discussed in lecture and was accurate with examples. That's what I would. That way, when it came to studying, this is what I do. Every day I'd read my notes from page 1 to present day. And so that if you're reading your notes every day, in 10 weeks you would have read like day 1's notes so many times you would have it memorized. In fact, this totally changed the way I studied for exams. It used to be when exam time came, I'd be there cramming. I'd be cramming for the midterm, I'd be cramming for the final, but it was just too much information to cram in one night or a couple of nights. But when I switched to this, where I have my notes and I can just read them, and it doesn't take long to read through a set of notes compared to a book. I never reread the book. I just read the notes. I could go into the final and know that everything that was discussed in lecture I already had memorized. And there are mixed opinions about memorization. A lot of people say, oh, memorization, that's not learning. I think that's wrong. Memorization is a big part of learning. Because what you have to do is you have to have that basic knowledge memorized. If you have the basic knowledge memorized, then what happens is, and this is from the books, I studied a lot of books when I was trying to figure out how to study and read a lot of books, but basically you have all this knowledge, and what your brain does, and this is the reading I did many years ago. Your subconscious ties everything together, and then from there you can do the advanced problems. And so you get the basic knowledge down first, and then let your subconscious work to get the advanced problems. And actually, I have a deja vu kind of moment because I just talked about this morning. So excuse me if I'm confused a little bit, but I had this experience happen to me. I was taking a final exam at UCLA. They have 10 weeks plus a finals week, so altogether 11 weeks. During finals week, you have 3-hour exams. The nice thing about UCLA is you don't have to go to lecture during finals week. The bad thing about El Camino is you have to go to lecture during finals week, and I probably am going to have to lecture during finals week because I'm probably going to be behind schedule a little bit. And so you're going to be juggling learning new material and studying for the final at the same time. Well, anyway, at UCLA, I took this 3-hour final, and there was one question that stumped me. I just needed a little bit more time, a little bit more time, a little bit more time, and then time ran out. And so I never answered that. And so right after the final, I went to Ralph's, which is across the street from campus, and I was at the checkout line. And during the checkout, I wasn't even thinking about that test. And during the checkout line, all of a sudden it hit me, the answer to that problem. And it was one of those weird things where the subconscious just kind of connected these dots, and then it was clear. I just needed more time. And so doing this gives you that additional time to get that sunk into your subconscious so that your brain can do the work for that. So on that note, I'm going to structure this class, and this is something I say every semester, but I just tell people to do it. But this semester is going to be structured a little differently. And I already had a question about this, and you might have heard this already. We're going to have a quiz every day, and the quiz is going to be based on your notes. So tomorrow's quiz is going to be based on your notes from today. And so I'm going to ask you a question. Now, if we're going to have a quiz every day, that's like 54 quizzes if you don't count the exam days. I'm going to only count 50 of those 54 quizzes, so I'm going to drop 4 quizzes. The quizzes are going to be worth 4 points each, so it's not huge. And this is going to be a short quiz, like a 5-minute quiz or a 10-minute quiz, beginning of class. And so we'll just put it to practice. So by the end of the semester, you should have all the material pretty well down, because let's say as we go on, okay, tomorrow's quiz will be on today's material, but let's say Wednesday's quiz will be on Monday and Tuesday's material. And so it's going to go like that. And so by the end of the semester, we're going to have a quiz on all the material. I mean, I can pick anything from the notes. But it won't seem so bad, right? It won't seem so bad if you've been flipping through your notes and you have a complete set of notes. In fact, having a complete set of notes is crucial. And so at UCLA, they actually have a professional note-taking service where you can pay for notes. Not every class has this. Like, for example, organic chemistry had it, and I bought the notes. At the time, the notes were over $100, for just a set of notes. But they were great because the note taker, who's a professional, would go to the professor afterwards and make sure that they didn't miss anything, and all the and that there were no errors in there. And so that was good. In other classes, then you just had to do the best you could. There are some classes that allow students to record, like history of French film. You know, I could bring this is old days, so I could bring in a tape recorder and tape the lecture. And that was a huge help. And so that made that class an easy A, I thought. It's an easy A because this is what I found out as a student at UCLA. As a student at UCLA, 90% of the test is just from the notes. It's kind of like regurgitation of the notes. 10% of the exam is like pushing the envelope. In order to push the envelope, you have to have the basics really well down, really thoroughly understood to really apply it to more challenging problems. And so this will keep you on top. So I'll probably do, like, as we go on in the semester, I'll probably do 1 question from the day before and 1 question from the past. Be anywhere from the past. Okay. But you'll find as we go along, it won't be so bad. You aren't going to have like 1,000 pages of reading to do to study for the quiz. You know? right, so that's a little bit about the philosophy, my philosophy and the philosophy of teaching this class. In addition to the quizzes, we're going to have 2 exams. There's going to be a midterm exam, which will cover the first half of the course. The midterm exams were 200 points, and then we're going to have a final exam at the end. The final exam is going to be comprehensive. It's going to cover everything from day 1 to the end. That's also going to be worth 200 points. And so we're going to have 200 points of quizzes, 200 points for the midterm, 200 points for the final. That's 600 points. This is also on the course information sheet. Then we have labs. Our labs are going to involve doing the lab work and then writing a report. Each lab's worth 20 points, doing the work and writing the report. And so we're going to have, I think 100 and, let's see, if you go to the course information sheet, all the numbers are there. The lab and reports, 20 points. We're going to have 10 labs and reports, total of 200 points. And so quizzes, exams, labs, that takes us to 800 points. Then we're going to have 190 points worth of homework. There are going to be 19 homework assignments, 18 from the book, 18 chapters, plus 1 10-point extra handout homework I'm going to give out. That's going to be 190 points. That takes us to 990 points. And then I have 10 points worth of lab technique, which includes the notebook. You're going to maintain a lab notebook, safety, preparation, efficiency, cleanup. And so altogether, we're going to have 1,000 points in this. And so a lab point, like the quiz point, 1 point in quiz is the same as 1 point in the lab, 1 point on the test, and 1 point on the homework. So they all carry, 1 point carries equal weight. The way the course grade is going to go is it's going to be 90%. If you get 900 points and above, that's an A. 800 is a B. 650 is the C cutoff. 550 is the D cutoff. And below 550 is an F. You can still get an F and have your grade above 550. How you can get an F and still have your grade above 550 is by failing lab. At UCLA, they keep lecture and lab separate. So you can fail a lab and still get an A in lecture. Here, this is a transferable class, so they don't let us do that. If you fail lab, that is, if you get a D or an F in lab, I can't pass you in this course because lecture and lab are tied together. So you could be getting an A in lecture in this class and still fail this class, okay, if you don't pass lab. And so it's very important that you do not miss lab. You know, if you start missing lab, it's serious. You're in serious jeopardy of failing this class, no matter how well you're doing on the test. Okay. But it's not so difficult to pass lab. There's resources, me, and additional resources. Lecture is a bit more of a challenge. For lecture, you can get some help here. If you need to brush up on your math skills, there's going to be a math skills for Chem 4 review session. These are 1 hour long, they're free, and there's no grade. So if you're interested in a little bit of math review, the first one is Thursday from 1 to 2 p.m. in Chem 133, which is just over here. And then there are 2 others, one on September 10th and one on September 11th. Other rooms here. So come up and grab a flyer if you're interested. Additional additional help, you can also come to my office hours. My office hours on the syllabus there. offices will be either held here or in Chem 120, which is my office, or in the lab, which is Chem 164. We're very lucky this semester. I'm sorry? Is there a question? We're very fortunate this semester because we got funding for SI. Does anybody know what SI is? Special, yeah. Special instructor, essentially, that's it. Supplemental. Yeah, we got funded for an SI coach, and her name's Allison, and she's here. That's Allison there. Do you want to say a few words about SI?
So hi, I'm Allison, and I'll be your SI coach for this semester. I'll be sitting in here on lectures and labs, so if there's ever a break and you have a question, I'll be here for you. And I also hold sessions on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 1:50. They gave me the rooms now, so yeah, I'll put those on a flyer and put a poster up in the room and whatnot, and I'll hand it out tomorrow because it's lab or lecture tomorrow. I don't know, you have a class.
Yeah, lecture.
So yeah, I'll give you my email if you guys need help. I'll just be like helping you study. I'm almost done with the Chem series. I've been in your shoes. It's a really fun class. So it sounds threatening with the points, but it's not.
Is it like mandatory, the attendance,
No,
or?
it's not mandatory, but we strongly recommend it because students that do go to it. I'm partnered with Professor Chabot, which we talk once or twice a week, and he gives me his lectures. He'll even give me exams if he's willing to.
Yeah.
And I structure those sessions from 1 to 1:50 around him personally and his lectures and his tests, so I can give you guys mock exams, and we'll do specific problems that maybe you guys didn't understand in class and stuff.
Where are you located at?
What?
Where is your office?
I don't have an office, but I can give you my email. But on Tuesdays it'll be in Chem 101, which is this room, and Thursdays in 164, which is the lab room. So like I said, I'll print out a little paper and pass it out to you all probably by tomorrow. Any questions?
That's that right there, right? That's the time.
Yeah. And I'm specific to this section, so I'm like working personally with you guys, but if you have friends in the other class, they can always come to the sessions too, but you're allowed.
Yeah, that is a huge plus because the tutors here, they have to tutor for many different sections, and everybody's on their own schedule. Like I might be behind, or they might be ahead, or I might be ahead, and then what we focus on are different topics. So if Allison's here, then she knows exactly what I want. Exactly. And this is going to help you narrow your focus and your reading.
And the right before class, so since we have the quiz every day, we'll be able to review what's on it and whatnot, and it's easy to get to. It's not like you have to stay after class and wait around and try to stay awake. Good?
Thanks. All right, so we have that special math section, and then there's an SI coach, Allison. But there are other, and my office hours. There's one other resource I want to mention right now. That is something called Piazza.com. I haven't set up my class yet. I'm going to set it up soon, but the website is on the course info sheet there. If you go to Piazza.com, actually, let me log out, and I'll show you what you're going to see. So you go here, later this afternoon I'll have it set up. So students get started, and then it's just going to ask you what school. So this is El Camino. So you just go to El Camino, you'll see El Camino Community There are 11 classes there right now. And then you're just going to type in Chem here. Okay, and then this list should populate this drop-down menu here. But I don't have it. There's no other Chem professors using this. So once I add my class in here, you'll see Chem 4. You'll just select that. Will be the only choice. And then what you'll have to do is you'll have to enter your email and access code. The access code is just going to be Chem 4, all lowercase. So it's going to look like this. It's written on the course information sheet, and so you can sign up for this. That'll be later today. Once you do that, this is what it's going to look like. So let's see. This is last semester. So I told you I'm going to record the lectures here. So take a look at last semester. This is what I posted. I posted the day 1 handouts, like the syllabus, so you'll have access to this in case you need it. All the other handouts I'll upload to Piazza as well. Here I updated my office hours last semester, so I'll post announcements and updates here. And then I have some links to the recordings if you want. I also have the homework. Our homework's going to start with chapter 2. There's no homework for chapter 1. So this is the assignment. If you look at the homework, each assignment's worth the same regardless of how many questions there are. So this is 29 problems in this. You have to watch out too. There are other things I learned about studying, which I'll touch on as we go on in the semester. But the homework is important. You need that practice here. 29 problems can take a long time. I remember being a student at UCLA and working on a homework problem for 3 hours. And I thought, is that really a good thing to do, 3 hours? And it turned out, no, it wasn't a good thing for me to do. I should have given up before then. But you think, give up. You don't want to give up on those types of things. I don't mean giving up because I mean doing a different approach. I had to reshift the way I studied. If I was spending 3 hours on a homework problem, I was wasting time. I didn't have time to waste. I was already using every waking moment to study. And so I had to rethink how I did my homework. And so thinking about how I did my homework, there are different philosophies regarding this. And a lot of professors here will disagree with my philosophy. My philosophy is this. If I start spending a lot of time and it's not clicking right away, I look at the solutions manual. A lot of professors say, don't touch the solutions manual. You gotta put in the effort. Otherwise, 3 hours of effort and you get nowhere. Was that really productive? No, that wasn't productive for me. And so what I did instead, and this is something I learned because, I probably got one of the worst grades in that Chem class, the first class I took at UCLA, but the person sitting next to me got the top grade. And so I started talking to the person next to me. We were both transfer students. And so, because he's a transfer, I was a transfer, why did he get the top grade? I got one of the lowest grades, maybe the lowest grade, the D something. So one of the things that he did that I didn't do was he did every single problem in the chapter. Now, how could he do every single problem when I'm spending 3 hours on one single problem? I thought that's impossible. But it's the way he does it. At UCLA, it's kind of fortunate. When I was there, every class had the complete solutions guide. It didn't have the guide or the answers to the odd number problems. It had the answers to every single problem. They didn't care. They didn't care because the exams were always harder than the homework. I used to hear this complaint all the time. Oh, the exam, there was nothing like the homework. No, the exams were always harder than the homework. I mean, the challenge problem. Like I said, 90% wasn't harder, but 10% the challenge was obviously going to be harder. And so no matter what they threw out in the homework, they could always make it harder on the test. And that's what we saw. That's what I saw. And so, so I started doing that. The way I did this was this. It's like my thinking, my analogy to this is like this. Let's say you go out to the forest to study. I'm going to study the forest. The forest, there's lots of plants, right? Or let's say you're studying the trees. Are you going to spend all your time in the forest studying just one tree, so you'll know everything about that one tree, but nothing about the rest of the forest? you know, in chemistry, you're gonna be hit with a whole forest of problems, test problems. You know, it's not just one problem. Oh, it's step one, do this. Step two, do that. You know, no problem like that. You're gonna be hit with this variety, and so and it turns out it's a huge advantage. If you do every single problem, and I still haven't told you how to do every single problem. If you do every single problem, then you've seen the whole forest. That way, when you come to the challenge problem, this is what I found with the challenge problems. The challenge problem is just a regular forest problem with a little twist or a little extra step here or extra step there, or a couple of extra steps. And so the challenge problems were much more manageable if you had this whole toolkit, you know, the whole forest at your disposal. And the way you do that is this. You got to build, in order to do the challenge problems, because it's not every class. There are some classes I just wanted 90%. I just wanted an A, and that's it. I didn't want to be the top. There are some classes at UCLA I wanted to get the top score. If you want to get the top score, you have to push the envelope a little bit. If you push the envelope a little bit, then you do a little bit more. Right? This is why you do all the homework problems. You know, that's what this guy did. This guy was getting the top score. I wanted to do that for certain classes, especially my major classes and the classes that I was most interested in. So I changed the way I did homework. The way I did homework was, if I wasn't getting it, if it wasn't clicking within like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then I just looked up how they did it. And if I did every single problem, then I saw every single variation of problem in the book. And if I knew every single variation of the problem in the book, then any kind of challenge problem that goes beyond the book, I would have much better chance of being able to answer that versus having only studied one problem or a select number of problems. Does that make sense? And so, well, I don't expect you to do every single problem. You can, I mean, because we're going to have the complete solutions guide. The complete solutions guide is available. So, and there's a lot of repetition in these problems. There's a lot of, sibling style problems, or very similar, just different numbers. But you could do the same thing. You could look at every single problem and then just flip through the solutions guide and get it that way. But these are the critical ones. These are the ones you should do. These problems, you know, some of them are quick, some of them take time. You know, especially the calculations, it takes some time to go through. But this will be the first homework assignment that's worth 10 points. All the homework assignments are worth 10 points. You can also post questions here. This last semester's class wasn't very active, posting questions. But you know, you can post private questions or public questions. Let's see. Like here, you know, question here, or this is something else. Yeah, this is something called the practice. The practice exam's a mock exam. This is just an exam I've given in the past semester. I'll post these on Piazza as well. Let's see. So, you know, I got B for both 4 and 5. It's a multiple choice practice exam. And then this S means a student answered this question. So students are welcome to answer it. I means I answered it, or instructor answered. So you can post questions here, and feel free to answer them, and I'll chime in as well. And so this is another resource that you can use. Yeah, I'll post last semester's exams here. So this is an old exam. So that's Piazza. It's free. All right. What we're gonna do, I'm gonna break up the class, so like the first half and the second half, and we'll split it with like a 10-minute break between. So let's go ahead and take a break now. Since it's 3:10.